Thank you. I'm really grateful to the organizers for giving me this opportunity to speak today. Let me begin with a confession. I don't do any open science work or anything related to even forms of publishing and so on. My interest mainly, and maybe a larger, commitment, an academic commitment, is more about, inclusiveness, that is, being inclusive in the science that we conduct, that is a step behind open access, that is in the conduct of open science. What do we do? And the organizers have actually been really brilliant in their use of the term open horizons. So that's actually been a brilliant thing that provoked some of us, and I'm really happy to see that. So what I'm trying to say here is about open science and open science technology and innovation systems, that is a larger set of systems. We heard about policy and public sector nexus, right? So it's about creating these systems that will allow for the kind of science that is inclusive, the kind of science that actually takes on board people's real life problems and also brings people on board. So Robert Hoppe, for instance, more than speaking truth to power, let's do science that makes common sense together. So, there have been great publications of that sort also, right? So I pitch this work on that, and I'm using the idea of, planetary boundaries, that is taking it outside the nation state. We're talking about regions, Europe, Latin America, Mexico, Africa, Asia. But I'm taking this out of the nation state and saying, well, let's not talk about the nation states and Indian, Indo-French kind of national identities, and talk about planetary problems. That is, problems that affect all of us, problems that have, in many ways, or pointedly, created by the kind of exclusive proprietary knowledge that we have created in the past. So the 20th century gave us plenty of that kind of knowledge, and that has created massive problems, and again, in the one sector that I study. So the confession again, I basically look at agriculture, agricultural science and environment development questions. So basically from a mixture of agricultural science and development economics. Yeah. So for me, problematizing this idea, the idea that there are planetary problems, and that these planetary problems need solutions which need a different kind of science, is where I'm getting to. Again, building on the universal nature of science, of course, but also about the lived experience of working with hundreds of farmers, farmer organizations, researchers, scientists from all walks of research, social sciences, humanities, natural sciences, soil chemistry, and all that. So I find that one of the key problems that we have in this country, as elsewhere in the world, also I've worked with scientists in France and Germany and so on, where the creation of an academic group that is kind of exclusive, that has the knowledge, and the others out there do not have the knowledge, that has been a problematic that I hope we will highlight in this. So let me just quickly finish the presentation. Planetary boundaries, that's what I'm going to focus on. So this is just to illustrate that this is something that has got the attention of several actors, and they have been publishing like crazy. That's, again, a very, 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 very high paid open access journal, but Ecology and Society. But the point is that these boundaries bring to us questions of boundaries of knowledge and about the ways of conducting science, and that's what I'm trying to get to here. Yeah. So agriculture is one sector that has violated 6 of the 9 sacrosanct planetary boundaries. So there are 9 Earth systems that they've identified, this planetary boundaries group. Again, very, very good scientists, biophysical scientists, all of them. And they've identified 9 basic Earth systems, of which 6 have been violated by one sector in the world, and a sector that is of least economic significance. You look at GDP ratios, agriculture contributes the least. And it is meant to be like that. That is, theoretically, it is foreordained that agriculture, whether in France or India or anywhere in the world, will dwindle or should dwindle in the size of the workforce and the size of, its contribution to the GDP, right? So it's a sector that contributes, very minimally to the GDP. global economy. But it is the sector that has violated 6 of the 9 sacrosanct planetary boundaries. This is a problematic that is, well, situated directly in the heart of the good exclusive science that we do. And we have to tackle it. And again, we can tackle it only through an open source engagement with the publics out there, but also with people who understand these interlinkages, right? So again, the theorizations in economics to biophysical limits. So these two things I've already said that organizers have allowed us to take this debate of open source knowledge, open knowledge creation outside just proprietary knowledge, picking it up and making it accessible to the public. That's one part of the story. Very good. But that is just not enough. There are many challenges, and if we don't address these challenges, we will not create these open horizons for our younger ones, for the next generation to take forward. First, we acknowledge there is a horizon, that there is a limit, that we need to change it. The second point that I really like to do, the word integration. How do you do this? How do you integrate, well, the kind of differences that I just mentioned, between development economics theorizations and the biophysical violations that we see, between, well, nation states and the global problems, between, well, really controlled, tight disciplinary holds and, well, knowledge out there that many people have, right? So planetary boundaries bring to us a very, very important question, whether and how, if they can, can national STI systems actually, well, work towards maintaining safe operating space is a term that comes from the planetary boundary studies. But what I want to do is to look at, well, two sites of action, the nation state and the STI system, as two sites of action that can actually enable open science and the conduct of the science as, well, as open as possible, as inclusive as possible. So what I just quickly run through these two slides. Basically, well, planetary boundaries tell us that there are two core planetary boundaries. Basically, climate change and biosphere integrity, both have been violated massively by agriculture, by this one little sector. Yeah, again, little as in tiny compared to other sectors that are of great industrial and financial significance. So service sector and the, well, secondary sector, industry and manufacturing are the two big sectors. And, well, agriculture is tiny, but it does the most damage. The good thing about planetary boundaries is that you can't downscale them. You can't say, like in IPCC, I mean, in the COP 28, 29, and so on, we heard, naturally determined emissions or nationally determined, voluntary determined. You can't do that with planetary boundaries. They are planetary in nature. A nation state can't commit to saying, okay, we will violate only this much of the planetary boundaries. You can't do that. It's out there, it's genuinely open and transnational. It is not about one nation state or one community to say we will do this, or one sector to say we will do this. You can't. So given that, regional and global options are necessary. What do we do? How do we go ahead with this? So by problematizing this, I'm hoping that we will actually see the scope that, again, we've spoken about scale, number of subscribers, number of people who look at open access knowledge. But how many of us actually enable the creation of open knowledge systems, again, open data depositories? So I would request any of you who are interested to please go to the Stockholm Resilience Centre and look up their databases. They have databases, they have access to those databases, but it's, again, very, very academic-centric. In other words, one of the key problems that we're living in right here, right in the campus next door, in several other universities that we see, is actually this academic clique that we have. We are, well, in some sense, alien to our own people. We are not an inclusive knowledge system. We need to create that. And how do we do this? We have to work towards it. We have to work towards, well, bringing in other forms of knowledge, again, working with the problems that our people face. So planetary boundaries is just to say that there are two things that are problematic here, because agriculture is a key violators, and two, well, STI, as in, the way we see it, science, technology, and innovation systems, are socially constructed. Yeah. So when you talk about, let's say, a particular technology, or carbon markets, or carbon removal, carbon capture and storage technologies, yeah, one particular set of technological and financial innovations that are given to people, these are technological determinism, and they don't really work. So for us as open source, as people who committed to open source, or again, open science and creation of open STI, again, innovation as in the generation, access to, and use of knowledge all combined in one. Innovation is not an artifact. Innovation is not a practice. Innovation is a combination of these three, basically generation, access to, and use of knowledge. And that is where the open science is seated most comfortably, because it allows for all these three to happen together. But how do we do this? We have to find ways of constructing this up. My previous speaker, Lydia's presentation, showed how Europe is making an effort to bring these together, to put knowledge that is, again, it's about access to knowledge, yes, but how do we create research teams that actually work on these questions as, well, open science, the conduct of open science? How do you assess that kind of science? Where is the, well, let's say, where are the right kind of indicators for one particular boundary which will show up in a region, which will show up in a local ecosystem, but will have planetary implications? The world has to face up to this. There is no way we can live without, well, acknowledging that our planet is changing. And open science, the conduct of open science, is something that will really help. I'm just making this claim that they both demand inclusive and open information systems, open knowledge systems that we created. One of the key complaints that I had there was about social sciences being left out, but I don't have time to deal with that now. So agriculture, like I said, is one sector that has violated 6 out of the 9 planetary boundaries. One of the reasons why we are still, well, let's say, committed to or asking questions about open science that can actually, well, turn around the kind of exclusive proprietary knowledge-based science, again, knowledge-based technology generation, which is disseminated to a whole range of users. Some of them theorized in development economics as, peasants are poor, but they're rational creatures, right? So it's these kinds of, well, let's say, 20th century theorizations that we're still living with, that we're still handling. Our state is totally committed to. I'm not just talking about India or France. All national governments are committed to these kinds of dated and, again, absolutely obsolete and pathetically alienating theories. We need to revisit these. Open science is one way to do it, and the way to do it is to ask questions about, well, who decides and how? So one of the things that I had, so thresholds, it's a biophysical entity, the boundaries are human determined, that is, we decide these are the boundaries that we don't want to cross, because if we get to a threshold of one particular biophysical system and it flips, we might have unintended consequences. We don't want that, right? So normative judgments, that is bringing in normative judgments, social sciences and humanities, including the social sciences and humanities, and the ability that people have to make the right kind of normative judgments and well, take a call on what we know and what we want to know is really crucial. Again, a reflection on the ways in which open science, open access is now almost all about these sciences, that is the natural sciences, and very little being discussed about the social sciences and humanities. I think we need to bring that in a big way. 2, because, first and foremost, because there is a lot that they have to offer. But 2, once we, well, let's say, violate certain things beyond a particular limit, it's only the social systems that will come to rescue. That is, you can't rely on a set of, well, artifacts or technologies that will save us, right? So, by inclusive and open, I'm just going to take a tiny little example. Just give me, I don't know if I have the time. Do I have the time? Okay, so this is basically a UNEP report that I was one of the lead authors with Bob Watson and Cleo Vacuel, and I, three of us were part of looking at the industrially produced meats, that is animal source foods, and how should it's a Frontiers report called What's Cooking. It's available on the UNEP webpage if any of you is interested. But the question here is, when we say that, well, agriculture violates planetary boundaries, it's again because of, like I said, exclusive technologies that are there, and again, proprietary knowledge that is encouraged by states, by the industry, of course, but also by people who consume these foods, right? I mean, and the ways in which we see this is that human-induced climate change, we all know that this is happening now, fine. But the fact that these have been at the forefront of knowledge systems for about 50 years now doesn't make a difference, They're still going on. 2, the solution that the report mentions, I've just highlighted this bit about In particular, open source research, and commercialization. Doesn't work. Because we'll end up in the same old hole, in the same old square that we've just left. Because if you produce open source information, in other words, governments fund the recommendation that we had in that report. I had problems with the team, but the point is that we had in that report was about creating open source, that is information available, publishing it, and then letting it off to be commercialized and used the same way. Doesn't work. We have to change the entire science, technology, and innovation architecture. Open source science will not work in the kind of system that we have now, which is all about proprietary knowledge and then releasing a bit of it to the public, to others to read, for academics to take up in any way. Academics, as again ivory tower people that we are, we will have access to more information, but that's not going to help at least some of the fundamental existential problems like planetary boundaries violations that we have now. So, can we get to new open horizons and do that beyond conventional commercialization questions and beyond technological determinism? There are ways to do it. There are ways to do it, but we need to confront the fact that inclusive and open is necessary for two specific reasons. One, that, well, integration is not really happening. We almost always see the ways in which some technology or some particular solution or some particular agenda is promoted with absolutely no question about integration. The architecture of science, technology, and innovation is, again, like I said, very, very well oriented to proprietary knowledge. All our assessments are about proprietary knowledge. All our, well, whether you publish or whether you have patents or whatever. There are several reasons that I've said why these are problematic and how we can change these. The planetary boundaries framework and the ways in which they approach it itself comes from within that system. They will not go very far if they don't, that is, if the planetary boundary proponents and the ways in Johan Rockström is the rock star of that is somebody who speaks on this regularly. The willingness to create that knowledge locally and the willingness to create, well, open regional platforms which can actually, well, they talk about how you can't disaggregate it or downscale it down to the national level or community level. But there are biomes across nation states for which you can have planetary boundaries, that is, you can actually establish Earth systems that are sustainable and resilient within those biomes. But that demands breaking national barriers, breaking, well, the conduct of science within the nation state and doing something that's across a biome, yeah? Whether it's a boreal forest or a massive river basin that cuts across several nation states. There are ways to do this.
Long live India and France friendship.